Hi everyone, it's William with the Grand Duke Dmitri Diary series. We're doing 1915 today. Quite a good one, I think, and like all the particularly good ones, it tends to raise as many or more questions than it answers. So our recap for today, well, in the previous video we were doing part of the long 1939 Grunwald letter, and we had Grunwald talking about the reactions to the two interviews that Dmitri gave. Some interesting observations, particularly about other royal family members in various countries, and all women for some reason, a queen and some princesses. Okay, and this idea that one could almost say that Grunwald was crediting Dmitri, with Grunwald's help, of course, with sort of single-handedly saving Ukraine from the Nazis, which, of course, was not the case. What he did was to get young Vladimir Kirillich out of a sort of semi-deal that he'd made with the Nazis to become the ruler of Ukraine. Okay, anyway, in 1915, the previous video from 1915, we had this just disastrous dinner in Moscow with Laming and three ladies, Nastya, Geltzer, and Tamara, whom we've come to be familiar with. And our cast for today, several people that we already know, but also two new performers, an actress and a ballerina. Leshkovskaya is the name of the actress, and Balashova is the ballerina. So we'll talk about them a little later. Our date is the 14th/27th of January, 1915. It's Moscow in the Metropole Hotel. It's 2 degrees above freezing, and Dmitri is still calling the weather filthy. On what basis, I don't know. Frightfully filthy this time. The day before it was just filthy. And overcast, so not even raining. So I don't know what, maybe there was, like ugly black snow piled up on the streets or something like that. Here we go. I got up around 11 o'clock. It's shameful even to remember how unsuccessful yesterday evening was. Nastya was arrogant, Tamara was bored, and Geltzer didn't know what to say. Astonishing. I lunched at 1 o'clock with GM at Prague. Wonderful blini. Before that, Cook came to see me, and I gave him photographs of soldiers for my godson and 2 gramophone records. He was moved to the point of tears. Around 3 o'clock, I went to see Auntie. We talked about Maria. She doesn't appreciate her very much. From there, I went to have tea at Nastya's, and I found GM there. Nastya continued to act boorishly and, of course, complained about yesterday evening. I went home around 7 o'clock. I dined à deux with GM at the Metropole. It was pretty boring. At 8 o'clock, I went to the Molly Theater for a premiere. They performed 2 plays translated from English. The first was Triangle. It was wonderfully acted by Leshkovskaya. Then I went to the Bolshoi. They were performing Kanyok. I arrived during the second act. Balashova, and then he puts in parentheses Balashova. I talked with her a lot. She asked me to write to her. I had supper at home with GM at the Metropole restaurant, and then we went peacefully to bed. Okay, so what's so interesting about this, you might ask? Well, sort of just the dynamics of what's going on. He's really upset by this dinner, and it doesn't seem like anything horrible happened. There wasn't a scene, so to speak, although he did sort of imply that there was. He said it was very dramatic. But why was Laming there in the first place? Did Dmitri want to introduce Laming to these friends of his, these female friends of his, and sort of show him that they were nice, respectable people? Maybe. That's the only thing I can think of. And then it didn't go well because one of them, Nastya, was sort of putting on airs, and this time he says she was arrogant and sort of playing the princess, it seemed like, in front of Laming, and Tamara just couldn't conceal the fact that she was bored with the whole thing. So Gelter comes off the best, of course. She just didn't know what to say. So clearly it was very awkward. When Dmitri describes social events, he always uses those two designations, successful or unsuccessful. And it was important to him when he was involved in or arranged a social event. It was important to him that it should be a success, and this very much was not. And yeah, he was embarrassed, clearly. What he wanted to accomplish in introducing them to GM did not come off. So just a sort of side note, he mentions the wonderful blini. Pretty much the only food Dmitri ever writes about is blini, because he just loved them. He just loved them. You know, if he was wandering around today and he knocked on your door, you would want to serve him blini, because that was his absolute favorite. Okay, so there's this interesting scene with Cook then. And Cook's son was clearly Dmitri's godson, so he says, and so it must have been. So Cook must have been Orthodox, I guess. And we don't know how old this boy is, but maybe, maybe an adolescent. These photographs of soldiers are not like photographs that Dmitri took. He calls them photographic cards. So they could be, postcards, or, I think of these collectible cigarette cards that they had back then of soldiers in various uniforms. But it sounds to me that they were kind of like these postcards of real people taken, for anybody who wanted to purchase. So he bought those for the boy. And then he also gave these two record albums, these two phonograph albums, and it's not clear whether those were for Cook or for his son. Dmitri had been a big, at least before the war started, he'd been a big fan of ragtime. So it's too bad that he doesn't tell us a little more about the records. Wow, so Cook was moved to tears. These don't seem like extravagant gifts at all, or more than one might expect from a friend who's showing his appreciation, because after all, Cook had been out there at Usovo. But for whatever reason, Cook was really moved by it. Okay, so the discussion between Dmitri and Aunt Ella about Maria. No details, but again, it's sort of typical of Dmitri to judge social occasions. It's whether a success or a not success, and with Ella and other relatives, who they like and who they don't like. We know that as a boy, he felt that Ella was close to Maria and just didn't like him at all. And now he's saying that Ella doesn't appreciate Maria. And judging by Maria's memoirs after the marriage, which turned out to be a disaster for her, that Ella pushed her into, she wasn't happy with Ella. So maybe it wasn't that Ella was thinking, like I'm sure Dmitri thought at one point, if I recall correctly, that it was too dangerous and not good for Maria to be at the front as a nurse. But Dmitri is sort of gauging it more around whether Ella likes Maria or not. So there's this, he uses the word appreciate. Ella doesn't appreciate Maria. Okay, why is GM at Nastya's? So after Aunt Ella, he goes to see the mysterious Nastya at her house or her flat, and he finds Laming there. he doesn't seem terribly surprised, and the question arises, why is Laming there? Probably knowing that Dmitri's going to come there for tea a little later. Why is he there? Was he simply invited to tea? Did he feel like he had a kind of responsibility to keep an eye on these relationships that Dmitri had with these women from the world of entertainment, of performing arts? Because there was always a danger, of course, that a Grand Duke was going to fall in love with an actress or a ballerina. Andrei and Boris Vladimirovich had done so. If you go back through the history of the Grand Dukes, you can see that it was always a danger. It was always a danger. And so maybe that's why GM, wanted to meet these women, and even in some instances without Dmitri present. Maybe, I don't know, that's speculation on my part. Maybe he himself found them interesting. He was a middle-aged man. He seems to have been happily married, but who knows? Anyway, Dmitri doesn't tell us anything about how that went. Except to say that, that Nastya is still, well, I guess he is telling us how it went, which was not good, because Nastya is still acting boorishly, usually a word that you see applied to men more than women, but she's just sort of making an ass of herself, I guess. And she's complaining about yesterday evening, supposedly how bored she was. I mean, Dmitri was complaining about it too, but in his diary. And so she's not making a good impression, or if she is, then Dmitri thinks she isn't. Okay. I don't know the English play that they were performing at the Mali Theater. The main actress, Yelena Konstantinovna Lyashkovskaya, was around 50 years old, and Dmitri compliments her acting. So he seems to have been a kind of theater connoisseur. It wasn't that he didn't have to be interested in an actress in order to be interested in her craft. Okay, so the Russian ballet Konyok Gorbunov is based on a Russian fairy tale, and the translation is actually Little Hunchback Horse. And I think it's kind of this absurdist fairy tale, and there's this peasant boy, Ivan, which is like the name Jack in English language fairy tales, and he has this hunchbacked horse that I think is magical in some way. And there was a ballet based on it. Dmitri turns up for the second act, and at some point, I think it was a 3-act ballet, but I guess afterwards he meets with the prima ballerina, who was Balashova, Alexandra Mikhailovna. She was close to his age. She was only a little bit older. She was born in 1887, so 4 years older than him. So that's on the young side of the spectrum of women that Dmitri was interested in, quite a bit on the young side. But so they have a long conversation apparently afterwards, and she asks him to write to her. He will be leaving Moscow. Actually, I should say this is his last day and night in Moscow before he goes back to Usovo for 10 days, and then he'll come back. But for the time being, he's going back to Usovo, so she asks him to write to her. And I don't remember if he did or not. He doesn't seem all that interested. So that's it for today. Next time we have these fireworks in Paris that I talked about, not literal fireworks, but in response to Dmitri's interviews in Candide and these other newspapers, and the reaction on the part of Vladimir Kirillich and on the part of other people within and without the Russian immigration. So really fascinating. And then, when we go back to 1915, we will have another 10 days in Usovo, and maybe we'll find out a little more. Oh, wow, I wish you could see that. Oh, you can, but not in detail. There are 2 monarch butterflies. I think they're monarchs. We don't get them very often here. Okay, anyway, Yeah, we'll see if he goes back to taking arsenic, if he goes back to having this constant sense of weakness. Yeah, it'll be really interesting to see. And Maria will be coming for a visit in Usovo. So for the first time in the year 1915, we get to see something of her in person. So come back for all that, and I'll see you next time.